Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's really great to be here again this evening. Night number four of our presentations in this post-session of the Unlocking Revelation Seminar. And we've got really a great topic tonight. And we are going to actually segue over into more information regarding the seal of God and the understanding of what Jesus has to say regarding the observance of the Sabbath day, the principles that He has laid down for us in the New Testament. And it's just filled with all kinds of information and questions that I think that will really help us think a lot of important things. So we're going to get started here. And I'm so glad you're here, and we're going to ask the Lord to guide us and help us. So shall we pray together? Our Father in heaven, tonight, as always, we are just here waiting upon you, Lord, for you to lead us and guide us in our thoughts. Help us to surrender our minds and our wills to you. And as you lead us in the study of the Scripture, that we with open mind will survey the thoughts that are presented there and understand your will for us today. So we ask for the impartation of the Holy Spirit, that you will lead and guide us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, well, this topic, Jesus, the Sabbath, and me, applying the seal of God. I gave it that title because it's about Jesus and it's about me. In other words, you. It's personal. It's personal between Jesus and yourself. That is about the Sabbath. And it's applying the seal of God because here we're not just going to study about it theologically. We're going to talk about how it actually applies to us in our lives in a day-to-day basis. That is a Sabbath-to-Sabbath basis. The seal of God is the holy character of God as demonstrated in His love and made known in His holy law. Remember this study? Remember how that God's name is written in our foreheads in the book of Revelation? And God's name means what? Means character. That's right. So, it's written into our foreheads. To receive the seal of God in the end time, we must receive God's life-renewing love through the Holy Spirit and let Him write His holy law on our hearts. Remember this? All right. Within God's holy law is the Sabbath commandment, right? That's a part of it. To complete the sealing process, the Sabbath commandment must be reclaimed in our lives. Within God's holy law, the Sabbath commandment is itself like a seal. God's seal is His holy character, and within His holy character that's impressed in our lives through the Holy Spirit, His laws is the Sabbath commandment, and itself acts like a seal because it states His name, His title, and His dominion, the three elements of seals in general, whether ancient or modern. For example, the Sabbath commandment states the name of God, the Lord your God. That's His name. The Lord, Yahweh. Title, maker of heaven and earth, creator. And His territory, where? Heaven and earth, and the sea and everything else that's in it. So there you see you have a seal, basic elements of it. And that's why God later on said in Exodus 31:17, "It, the seventh-day Sabbath, is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day He rested and was refreshed." No other day is a sign or a seal with God. Moreover, it says in Ezekiel 20:12, "I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who" what? Sanctifies. And what does the word sanctify mean? Redeem, to be saved. In other words, if you want to know what is the sign, what is the thing that you can point to that is an element of celebration that you can look to on a regular basis that says that God redeemed me, according to the Bible, it's what? It's the Sabbath day, yes. The seventh-day Sabbath given at creation was to be God's perpetual reminder of our roots. If we had always kept the Sabbath, there would never be an agnostic, there would never be an atheist, and so forth. There would never be an evolutionist. because it says that God created the earth in 6 days. That's what the memorial of the Sabbath is. Genesis 2 and 3, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And God blessed the seventh day, and sanctified it. So what did he do to the seventh day? 3 things. He blessed it, sanctified it, and he rested on it. Actually, the sequence is that, first of all, he rested on it, and then later on, because he rested on it, he blessed it and sanctified it. Sanctified means he set it apart for a special holy use. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath holy? Well, first of all, it means that we ourselves must be holy. We must ourselves be surrendered to Christ. And Christ must work his creative power in us and change us and turn us into new creatures. Because only he who is holy first in Christ is able to keep the Sabbath holy. Does that make sense? Well, God also tells us some things not to do and some things that we can do. Stop from doing our regular work to earn a living. Okay? That means the regular work. We're going to talk about the nature of work and stuff as we go on here tonight. Stop from doing unnecessary personal work, things that would distract us from a more positive spiritual direction. Namely, begin spiritual activities like. So the Sabbath is not a day where you stop activity like nothing happens, or you just sleep 24 hours. That's not the idea. It's that you stop doing these secular activities and you start doing these spiritual activities. You see? It's not a cessation of activity, it's a change of activity. Things like attendance at church, Christian fellowship, Bible study, family focus with a spiritual emphasis, delight in God's nature, personal reflection, prayer time, acts of benevolence and compassion, sharing the gospel, and what do you say? Take a nap? That'd be all right? Okay. Now, where am I getting all that from? I'm getting that from the Bible, and I'm also getting it from Jesus, and that's the focus of what we're going to talk about here tonight. We're going to talk about the Sabbath and the principles for observing it that comes mainly from Jesus. Jesus is our example. Jesus taught 4 principles about Sabbath observance. Number 1, do whatever is necessary to proclaim the gospel. Number 2, do whatever is necessary to save or preserve life. Number 3, do acts of goodness, kindness, and benevolence. Number 4, take time to worship God in church. What did Jesus do for the Sabbath when he was here? He was a reformer, and he reformed the Sabbath among the Jewish people. He released it from its man-made rules. He restored the proper way to observe it. He taught what was proper to do on it, and he championed it in the face of persecution. We're going to look at all these things as we go on here tonight. This study focuses on the details of the principles of Sabbath observance that Jesus taught, as recorded in the 4 Gospels. And what are the 4 Gospels? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of course. They are some of the strongest evidence in the New Testament that the Sabbath is for everyone who follows Jesus. All right, so here we're going to come to Mark 2:27, and I introduce you to our study guide for tonight, and I want you to turn to the 2nd page. And we're going to go almost 3/4 of the way down the page. You see where it says Mark 2:27? Perhaps there's no better place to start than with the statement of Jesus in Mark 2:27. And here I'm going to read it. This is sort of a summary statement. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Okay, does that make sense? I'm going to point out 3 things. The Sabbath was made, what's the word that's underlined? For man. In other words, it's for man's benefit. It's for his restoration. It's for his health and longevity. It's for his benefit. It's for mankind. The second thing, the Sabbath was made for who? For man. In other words, everybody. Mankind, right? The Sabbath was made for every person on the face of the earth, correct? Yes, that's what it says, mankind. That's right. And then the Sabbath was what? Made. In other words, it goes back to where? It goes back to creation. Jesus himself was the active agent in the creation. Jesus himself created the Sabbath. Because there was nothing made that he didn't make. Remember? John 1, 2, and 3, right? Okay, actually that's verse 3, but that's the point. It also says it in Colossians 1. He made everything. And he made it at creation. So What else did God make a creation that's special to us today? Is not marriage special? All right. Is marriage for everybody upon the face of the earth? Well, I guess that's a loaded question. But potentially, it's for everybody, right? Okay. All right. In other words, God instituted that marriage ceremony could be for the human race. And at the same time, on the next day, because he put Adam and Eve together on the 6th day, and on the 7th day, he made the Sabbath day. All before sin. So this is God's perfect plan for the human race. Okay? Does that make sense? Let's summarize it. The Sabbath is for the benefit of mankind. The Sabbath is for all mankind. By the way, not the Jews only. There are some people today who think that the Sabbath is a Jewish day. This is a common myth that's really misunderstood. Because if you study the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, you see that it's for all peoples, all nations. The Sabbath was made at creation. It was not temporary in nature, like I've just described it here. Now, look at the note here, or actually the next paragraph, I should say. It says, this is the overall principle that needs to be remembered in every discussion about the observance and experience of the Sabbath. This text teaches that the Sabbath is certainly to minister to the benefit of man, and that man is not to exist for the purpose of compliance to rules about the observance of a day. Now, the idea of rules for rules' sake, you understand what I'm saying? Remember how we studied about in Jesus' day, the Jewish people had multiplied hundreds of rules about how to keep the Sabbath? And they had really moved the Sabbath far away from God's intention that He gave it in the Old Testament, and what He intended for it to be for all the Gentiles. And so they had put a massive restrictive man-made rules upon it and made it a burden. Jesus was to free it. Now, the next paragraph, that's why we do not make any rules for Sabbath observance. We leave it open for each person to decide after a complete understanding of the principles involved in how we may best obtain the blessing that God put into the day. That doesn't mean we're free to do whatever we want. We have to be free within what God has told us to do. And what God has told us to do is where we learn it from His principles throughout the Bible, and we're going to focus tonight upon the principles that Jesus is bringing forth. Okay? Okay, so now I want to just mention here at the top of page, page 3. Do you see how we're addressing the subject here today? We're not beginning by asking what is right or wrong to do on the Sabbath, but instead what can or should be done on the Sabbath to help us obtain the blessing contained in it. Remember, God blessed the day? Did He bless it for Himself? He blessed it for who? Everything He did on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days of creation, He did for mankind. The 7th day was the same thing. He blessed it. And we have to get that blessing. And so we need to follow His instructions on how to get that blessing. So we're focusing here on the positive side of it. Go on down in your sheet there to the paragraph that begins, well. See it there, about 3 or 4 down? Well, so with the Sabbath, when it comes to asking ourselves, what is Sabbath observance made of? We should not ask ourselves, is it right or is it wrong? But will this enable me to obtain the blessing? Do you understand where I'm going? I mean, that's the problem with the Jews. They always asked, is this right or is this wrong? And then they made up their own rules and standards. And so it became encased about with lots of restrictions. Instead, if we ask ourselves, is this enabling me to receive the blessing according to God's plan for me, then I can do it or not do it. That make sense? Okay, so here we go. Right in the middle of the page there, it says, are there then some principles for Bible observance that we can find in the Bible? And that's what this slide is saying. Are there then some principles for Sabbath observance that we can find in the Bible? Just before we slide into the statements of Jesus, I'll just remind you of this. This comes directly from the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do what? No work. Okay. We go over to Isaiah. And Isaiah has lots to say, by the way, in chapter 56 of how the Sabbath was for the Gentiles. And that the Israelites were to share it. The Jewish people were to share it with the Gentiles. But in chapter 58, he goes on to say, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure. You know what this, understand this phrase, if you turn away your foot? It's the idea if you put your foot on something, you're desecrating it. You know? But if you take away your foot from doing that, from putting it upon the Sabbath, from doing your what? It says your pleasure, but the word there really means, in the original language, Hebrew language, it means business. Doing your business. On what? My holy day. You see, that the day is not ours. We think that all days are ours, but they're not. One day doesn't belong to us. One day belongs to God. Now, that's not what I teach or what my church teaches. It's what the Bible teaches. I teach it because it's in the Bible. There it says it's my holy day. And call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable. So in other words, if you pull yourself away from trouncing on it and disregarding it and call it what it is, God's holy day, a Sabbath day of delight, honorable, and shall honor Him, not doing your own ways or finding your own pleasure, that is business, or speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in what? So here we have kind of a positive thing, right? This is like if you will actually focus upon what God intends for you in the Sabbath day, you will find it a delight. You will delight yourself in the Lord. The channel is the Sabbath is actually a channel to draw closer to the Lord. Any question on that? Jesus presents His own interpretation of Sabbath observance in the New Testament. He amplifies the teaching of the Old Testament. What does the word amplify mean? Makes it larger, right? Makes it bigger. Magnifies it. Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what He does here. I like it when you can show me from the Bible something, and then I like it when you can show me from the Bible in a clear passage. And then, but I really like it when you can show me from the Bible in a clear passage in which Jesus Himself is teaching and explaining the very thing I want to know. What I'm trying to say here is that we're going to get it from the top tonight. We're going to get the principles for Sabbath observance directly from Jesus because He is definitely clear about it. Now, you can't get any higher than the Lord Himself. If ever I want to be guilty of something, it is following the teachings of Jesus completely. Can you agree with me on that? All right, we're all guilty of something. Might as well be guilty of that. If you're guilty of that, you know what you get as a nickname? Your nickname is Christian. Because you are a Christian. Because you're following Christ. In fact, that's how they got the name, in Antioch. They were always talking about Christ in Antioch, and so they called them, the first time they called them Christians, because they were following this person named Christ. All right. Now, today, there's a great movement to return to the observance of the biblical Sabbath, which corresponds to keeping holy to the Lord Saturday, the seventh day of the week. On what will we base our decision in the great debate? The Bible presents much on this subject, but what helps me the most is what I find in Jesus' own teaching and practice. Look at the top of page 4 on your study guide sheet. Second paragraph. In other words, if we are Christians and if we say we follow Jesus, should we not do what He tells us and follow His example in the things He told us to follow regardless what we may think or what others teach or say? Do you agree with that? What I'm saying is that Jesus' word should be the last word, that is to Christians who truly follow Him. He is the boss, and there is no higher authority. There is no other place of appeal. So let's turn now to these principles of Sabbath observance that Jesus laid down. There are actually about 6 or 7 different Sabbath, miracle, controversy stories in the Gospels in which Jesus gives His instruction regarding the Sabbath. Let's start looking at Mark chapter 1, verse 21. And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught. Now, he didn't just teach. There was an interruption while he was teaching. And the story proceeds here in the next few verses, 23 to 27, of how there was a person who was possessed of a demon who came into the synagogue. And he was causing an uproar and pointing out Jesus and just being a nuisance. And at that point, Jesus stopped the man and cast the demon out. Now, that's a pretty significant thing, don't you think? And so, what we have here is, look at the paragraph down there where it says, "Thus we see Jesus." Thus we see Jesus making the Sabbath day an opportunity to spread his mission among the people. Also, he lets the Sabbath day be an opportunity for working to advance God's kingdom in a most marvelous way. Does that make sense? Now, the next paragraph says, "I can hear someone say, but Jesus was just there in the synagogue because he was trying to find people. The Sabbath really meant nothing for him personally. He was only going with the cultural flow." That is the claim of some people who wish either to do away with the Sabbath worship day or who support Sunday. Now, they don't all do that, but some people do. I just bring it up for the sake of discussion. But is that claim really true? The answer is not at all, and here's the proof why. Turn to Luke 4, 14 and 15. "Then Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee." He's at the beginning of his ministry. "And the news of him went out through all the surrounding region, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all." In other words, he repeated his synagogue teaching again and again and again, over and over again. While you might say that Jesus' synagogue teaching revealed a habit of his, would you say that Jesus had a habit of attending the synagogue? And when would he attend it? Sabbath. Over and over again, yeah. I'm suggesting to you that Jesus had a personal habit of Sabbath day worship. Does that make sense? That's why when someone says, "Oh, well, he was just in a synagogue because he was just going with the flow," that's not true. He was there because he was there personally to worship in honor of the Sabbath day and its commandment. Any question on that? Look at the very next verse. Verse 16. "So he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as," what's the next few words? "As his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read." Now, what does that tell you, as his custom was? It means that he was a Sabbath keeper by choice, right? Now, look at the little section there, A, B, C, D. Nazareth was his hometown. He went to a synagogue, and it says, as his custom was, according to his own very personal habit. And letter D, the Sabbath was Jesus' own special experience. Now, since childhood, he had been taught about the Sabbath. And he grew up and became his own person. And at 12 years old, he was found in the temple. He was already at his Father's work. Already an independent mind. Do you think that he was keeping the Sabbath because it was a Jewish tradition? Or do you think it was because he knew it was God the Father's will? Because it was God the Father's will, right? I can tell you this, Jesus never accepted the teachings of the rabbis, the traditional teachings, the tradition of the elders. He rejected them, and he went about keeping God's will and law. And so he knew how to choose between things that were just simply Jewish versus what God's will is. You understand what I'm saying? And so he chose the Sabbath. And so that became his own personal habit. This habit belongs to himself. And by the way, the original text there, in the original it says literally, according to what was customary to him. According to what was customary to him. Now, look at the next paragraph. Now here is a clear statement that Jesus kept the Sabbath, not because he was a Jew, or going along with the culture like we said before, or that it meant nothing to him personally, or because he had to go there to find people to preach to, but because it was his own choice to do so, his own personal choice. He was not just going along with the Jews to the synagogue because that is where the people were. But sure, they were there, but Jesus was there because he had from early childhood made it his own habit to attend a synagogue church. By the way, by going to the synagogue, did Jesus increase the chance of a large crowd to hear him, or did he decrease the chances of a large crowd to hear him? He decreased it because you had less people in a physical building, right? So he felt it was important enough that he should be there because he's our example. Next paragraph. Now think of it. If Jesus only needed to find people, all he had to do was appear anywhere, mountainside, villages, homes, and actually on any day of the week. He did not need to go to the synagogue to find people. Does that make sense? He added the Sabbath synagogue visits because it was, in Jesus' view, a holy day of worship and a day for holy convocation. And Jesus makes no mistake. And Jesus sets us an example. Any questions? Is it clear? Now, of all people, did Jesus need to attend church? No. If there was one person that we could excuse from attending church, who would it be? It would be Jesus, right? Just like when he came to John to be baptized. Did he need to be baptized? Remember the occasion? John said, no, I need to be baptized by you. But Jesus said, let me be an example for all of us. But as our example, he went, as the sinless one, being in compliance with God's command, he was baptized, and he showed us what to do on Saturday mornings to be with God's people in the worship of God, or whenever else the church meets, of course. So he was a regular attendee at church. He is a true example to all those people who say, I don't need church. You may meet people, right? And they've had a bad experience with church and so forth. But here, Jesus is their example. This is what it means to follow Jesus once you know better, of course. And when he came to church, he gave of himself according to the talents given him of God. He was no pew warmer or bench sitter, but according to the talents and the spiritual gifts endowed him by God, he acted and made church a blessing for all those who came. He got up to read, he preached, he healed. He did not come and say, how can this church meet my needs? You find a lot of that today. Now don't get me wrong, a church should meet people's needs, but people who come should not come there, as a consumer. They should come there as a contributor, and that's Jesus. That's what he did. So, let's sum up some of these things that we've already discussed here. Here's a summary of Sabbath principles from Jesus' example. We should attend church. Do you agree with me? We should attend church on the seventh-day Sabbath. Do you agree with me? That is what you need to decide. Are you above your master or are you under him? If you're under him, then you'll do what he said. To attend regularly, to plan to be a blessing when you come, to share the spiritual gifts God has given you, and not be a bench sitter or a pew warmer. Any thoughts or questions before we go on? Does it make sense? Isn't it great? We can get all this right directly from Jesus and the teachings of the New Testament. Okay, let's go on to page 6. Top of the page, it says, on another Sabbath, Jesus and his disciples were walking through the grain fields. And as the story goes, the disciples were hungry, and so they plucked some of the grains as they were passing through it and began to eat it. How many are familiar with this story? Anybody? Okay, good. Well, we're going to read it here. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. And his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." What's the first thing that we should notice in this whole discussion? Are they talking about, is there a discussion between Jesus and these Pharisees that the Sabbath should be kept or that the Sabbath should not be kept? Is that what the discussion's about? Is a discussion about how the Sabbath should be kept? That's a very important point. You know that? Because if Jesus is going to argue how the Sabbath should be kept, then what is he implying? That it should be kept. You get it? All right, that's the first thing in this next paragraph. Now notice the whole discussion is not over whether Jesus abolished the Sabbath, as some people think today. The Pharisees didn't accuse Jesus' disciples of abolishing the Sabbath, but they accused him of what? Breaking it. It is not at all about whether there is or is not a Sabbath for the followers of Jesus to observe, but only and always and ever about what is lawful to do on the Sabbath. That fact alone proves that Sabbath observance is required of all of Christ's followers today. By the way, when was Matthew written? Matthew was written somewhere between 60 and 70 AD. So now we've got probably at least 30 years or more since the time when this event occurred. Why is Matthew recording it? Is he recording it for the people in Jesus' day or for the people when Matthew's writing? He's including it for the people in the day that Matthew's writing because he wants to let the Christians know that this is how they're supposed to keep the Sabbath. Not like the Pharisees, the Jews who are always their enemies and their antagonists, telling them that that you are not really Jews because you're not really keeping the Sabbath right because you're not keeping the traditional laws. And the Christians who have separated themselves from that, they're going back to Jesus as their basis. They're going back to Jesus and what he taught about the Sabbath. And that's why it's included in the book of Matthew. So there's really two levels here. The level in which this event actually occurred, and then the level of why Matthew included it to teach the people of his generation about the Sabbath. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, how does Jesus answer? But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, for which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests." What is he doing here? Rather than taking them to task and telling them that they're itty-bitty, hair-splitting minutia of our criteria for breaking the Sabbath or not breaking the Sabbath, instead of talking to them on that level, he simply goes back to the Scripture and he pulls out an example where somebody does something that's not lawful in terms of the normal routine, but he does it for a human need, to show that the human need is to be met first, and then the regular expectation. Look at the notes there, A and B. It refers to an Old Testament example. David and his men were hungry. Jesus taught that in the service of God, a law does not take precedence over the promotion and progress of the kingdom of God. Here was a necessity while in the service of God. In other words, that which is ordinarily not lawful is made an exception when done to meet the necessities of those who are in the direct and immediate service of God. So here was David, and he had his men, and he was the anointed of God, and they were hungry. And so they did something that was not normally allowed. They gave him the food. And Jesus says, "Have you not read that? I thought maybe you guys knew that stuff. That it was okay to make an exception and feed people who are in the service of God and not let a rule trump the needs of mankind." You see that? Now, is Jesus saying here that it's okay to break the Sabbath? No, what he's saying here is that they didn't break the Sabbath, that it was following the precedent of an exception because of human need. In fact, he's going to say it right here. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless. Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. Jesus brought up another example. He's saying, look, in the Old Testament, the priests worked very hard on the Sabbath day. They have to do the sacrifices. They have to apply the blood. They have to wash things. They have to do all kinds of... In other words, the priests who work in the temple, if you were to look at it strictly, not doing any work, then they're doing work, aren't they? But what's the purpose of the priest and his ministry? To restore and bring the gospel to the people who are going to the temple to worship. And therefore, while they strictly break the Sabbath in terms of, actual literal work and so forth, it's not really breaking the Sabbath because it's in harmony with the purpose of the Sabbath. And the purpose of the Sabbath is to bring the gospel of God to people and to restore them. Does that make sense? Look here, under letter C here. And the priests who serve in the temple on the Sabbath. Now the priests keep very busy, and by the strict standard of the law, they too profaned it. But the key thing, what were they doing? Doing the service of God, preaching the gospel, since the Sabbath is made for man's benefit and not man for the purpose of keeping rules about a day, the priests were innocent, since they were employed in the same service for which the Sabbath was ordained, to bring a blessing upon mankind. Does that make sense? Now, the next paragraph. Thus the disciples were what? Innocent. Jesus said, just as the priests of the Old Testament served God and did not keep Sabbath strictly according to the rules because their activity in the service of God, so the disciples in their activity in the service of Jesus were guiltless. That's what verse 7 says. They were with Jesus and he was greater than the temple. And they were in the service of God with Jesus. And so if they were in need of the service of God, what they did was also lawful. Does that make sense? Okay. Now also verse 7 says, but if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the who? 2 points I want to emphasize here. He calls them guiltless, correct? By the way, what did they actually do? You remember? They took the grains, right? So in other words, they would take some grains and then they would kind of shuck them and put them in their mouth like that. Is that really breaking the Sabbath? According to God's plan? No. But it was according to the oral tradition of the Jews, because they had many, many rules. And one of them was you can't harvest and you can't pluck things like that. And they had many rules like that, and so for them it was work. But God never said that they could never do something like that. It was these man-made rules that had encrusted the Sabbath, and Jesus was setting it free. The second thing is, not only were they guiltless, but he also tells them that if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. In other words, when there is a human need, there's no point in making a rule that someone can't do something, but you allow the need to be fulfilled, and that's in harmony. Allowing the need to be fulfilled is in harmony with the Sabbath purpose. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, notice how Jesus ends this lesson. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Matthew 12:8. The crowning command. It says here in a paragraph about partway down the page, it says, for those who do not think that the Sabbath applies to them today, all you have to do is to listen to the Master. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath day. Is he Lord of a day that only belongs to himself, or is he Lord of a day that he also wants to share with you? He wants to share it with you, yes. Now, he cannot be Lord of a day that does not exist. And why would he go to such lengths to proclaim himself Lord of a day that would supposedly be no more in a few years, as some claim that he abolished it? I've talked to some people, and they've told me that while Jesus was to keep the Sabbath because he was a Jew, he was required to do it, he never really intended for his followers to keep it, and that as soon as he died on the cross, it was all done with. The problem with that is that it doesn't say that anywhere in the New Testament. And in fact, everywhere we go, we find people keeping the Sabbath still. That we find them keeping the Sabbath here, 60, 70 AD. That's why Matthew's writing about it. He's writing here, he's remembering these old events to teach the Christians of his day that we keep the Sabbath according to Christ's way, not the Pharisees' way. All through the book of Acts, the Sabbath is mentioned, you see. So all of that is not true. And yet here, Jesus is teaching us how we are to go about it. By the way, if the Sabbath was to be done away with at the cross, what about the other 9 commandments? Should they be done away at the cross too? You can't do away with one and keep the 9. Because if you are guilty in one, James says, you're guilty of what? They stand as a unity. So now, we've got a kind of ridiculous scenario here. If we do away with the Sabbath, then we have to do away with the other 9. If we do away with all 10, that means that there's now no standard. That means that there's now no sin. Because sin is only known when? When the law is present. And if there's no sin, then what do we need a Savior for? You see that? So let's not go there. Let's not go to the idea that the Sabbath is done away with at the cross. It just doesn't make any sense from a practical standpoint or a theological standpoint or a biblical standpoint. Truly not from a historical standpoint, because we know all Christians kept the Sabbath without exception. All right, next paragraph. You see, being Lord of it, or over it, if you please, means he has the right to establish it and its proper observance on the basis of his own interpretation of the matter. Thus, here we see Jesus taking matters into his own control to teach the truth about Sabbath observance. All right? Does that make sense? Any questions on this? Now, the next paragraph gets into the information that we've shared before about how that Jesus had to bring the message of the true Sabbath to the Jews and to help and to correct them from their legalistic ways. Jesus had to do this as part of his mission to establish the kingdom of God. You see, for years the Jews have been accumulating a body of oral traditions about all kinds of things, perhaps some good, but certainly some not so good. Unfortunately, this was true regarding the interpretation of the observance of the Sabbath. The Jews had come to place an extreme importance on the observance of the Sabbath to the point of multiplying minute rules for its observance. Now their concern to observe God's holy day, a rest day, is not bad in itself, but the extreme to which they went left them forgetting the fact that the day was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. There was a saying among the rabbis that went something like this: Israel was made for the Sabbath so that God would have someone to keep it on earth. So Israel was made for the Sabbath. Of course, what did Jesus say? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Exactly, yeah. All right. Let's go on down to, well, I guess here on the next page, you see letter A there sticking out? They came up with 39 different types of classes or categories or types of work. Well, guess what? Reaping and threshing were 2 of the classes, and therefore, according to their reasoning, the disciples were guilty of breaking the Sabbath. By the way, that was also true for healing, which we're going to see here in a moment. Then the rabbis could take each of these 39 classes or categories and subdivide them ad infinitum process of multiplication of laws and rules for every situation in life. All of life on the Sabbath day for them was a matter of right and wrong. Almost stifling. So let's summarize what this story teaches us. It teaches that when in the direct service of God, such as preaching, teaching, helping, you are free to do whatever it takes to sustain yourself, to accomplish the mission of uplifting mankind and bringing salvation to them. Does that make sense? Okay. We don't have to go very far to find our very next story. In fact, it's right there in Matthew, the same chapter and the very next section. And here it is. Matthew 12, 9 through 12. It's like Matthew was lumping the Sabbath material together. Okay, we got 2 Sabbath stories right here. Because I got to get that teaching in so we can understand how to keep it in our day. Now, when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might what? It was a trick. It was a trap. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, Jesus? What did he say? He said to them, what man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Look here, right in the middle of the page there, a little bit down from Matthew 12, 9, it says, again there arises the question, what is lawful to do on the Sabbath day? That's the question, not whether we need to observe the Sabbath. That was accepted by all. Even the Jews had some exceptions to Sabbath observance to save life of animals. They had forgotten the value of man and the real purpose of the Sabbath in favor of the focusing on the man-made rules. So Jesus states that it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. See what it says here in the next verse? It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. That's about as clear a statement from Jesus as you can find anywhere that says that we as Christians are to keep the Sabbath. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath day. You know, someone says, well, yeah, he's just saying, well, no, if you choose to do it, or, you know, if it's your thing. No. He's saying and assuming that all accept the Sabbath because there's no other day. And that if you want to know how to keep it, you do it by doing good. Does that make sense? All right. We're chiseling away and we're developing this long list of principles that we can understand the Sabbath from Jesus' perspective. And he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out. And it was, what's the word? Restored. That's the key word. That's the thematic word in this section about the Sabbath. What is the activity of the Sabbath supposed to do to believers and for believers? Restore them physically and spiritually. The Sabbath is a channel to experience the direct power of God in your life. He restored it as whole as the other. Okay? Now, let's go on to the next page. Summary. Here we go. We can add to the list acts of goodness, kindness, and benevolence. Acts that what? Save life. Acts that bring bodily and spiritual restoration. Am I doing this right? I'm trying to get out of these episodes everything that's there. Does that make sense? Okay. Great. Now, we'll go on. It says here in the next paragraph, now note what happened as a result of Jesus' teaching about the Sabbath in this manner. This is why they sought to kill him, because he taught the truth about the Sabbath. Look what it says. Verse 14 of that same chapter. But the Pharisees went out and took counsel against him how to what? Destroy him. Jesus knew that he was taking his life in his hands. He knew that it was going to create a major divide, major problem, and that he could be killed because of it. But he decided that the Sabbath was so important, and because the people had misrepresented it so much, that he had to stand up in its defense. And I'll tell you right now, this is the first reason that's ever given in the Gospels as to why they put Jesus on the cross, because he was restoring the Sabbath. This is it right here. They took counsel against him how to destroy him. Now, there were other reasons, of course, but this was like the one that stuck right up there. Jesus knew this opposition would come, but he felt the proper understanding and observance of the Sabbath would be so important that he would not avoid that threat. All right? That's why Matthew put it in, because it was so important. It's like it says here, by the way, did you know that these two stories of Jesus and his teaching on the Sabbath are repeated in Mark and Luke, so that all three Gospels say the same thing on this subject? It was such an important teaching for early Christians. They are recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke to instruct Christians how to observe the Sabbath in their day, between 60 and 70 to 80 A.D., when Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote. It was important to them, for of all the materials of Jesus' life, they selected out many regarding the Sabbath. So when I read the New Testament, I see nothing here of Jesus doing away with the Sabbath, but only more and more affirmation that he gives it to me to observe with him as a special day. It is his special gift to me. All right, let me pause a minute and ask, are you tracking with me? Does this make sense? Any questions? Feel free to ask any question you wish. Yes?
So nowadays, if you don't buy or sell on the Sabbath, and if it causes another person to work, and you needed food, and that was the only option you had to get it, how does that play out?
The question is so long, it's hard to repeat. But basically, you're asking if I need something and I go to the store and I buy it, am I making somebody else work? The answer is no, because they've already chosen to work on their own, and they're there they've already made those the decisions on their own. You want to make a decision to be prepared, and that's why Friday is the preparation day. It's the day you prepare for the Sabbath so you can be free of those things. Okay, yeah. And if Friday's too busy for you, well, back it up and do Thursday. Let's go ahead and look at some more material here. Another story, Luke 13, 10 through 17, gives the same ideas. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity, 18 years, and was bent over and could in no way raise herself up. Can you imagine this woman? I don't know, she's like at a 90-degree angle? I don't know. That's pretty incredible, don't you think? But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, "Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity." And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. So Jesus went over and touched her and healed her on the Sabbath day in the synagogue. On purpose. Make sense? All right. Now, we're just setting the stage. But the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, and he said to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath day." This gentleman, this leader of the synagogue, was so incensed, he couldn't rejoice in the fact that somebody was ill for 18 years and was now, in a miraculous way, healed by God. It just simply missed him entirely. And he didn't understand God's Spirit working. That's the case what it is when everybody just focuses on rules. They're more interested in getting it right rather than celebrating the beauty and the miracle that God does in somebody. And so he's mad because healing for him is work. The Lord then answered him and said, "Hypocrite! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it?" See, they would take even their own pets and help them. Are you telling me that your pet is more important than this woman? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the what? It's especially appropriate that she be loosed on the Sabbath day, because what is the purpose of the Sabbath day? Restoration, to release people, to save them, to preach the gospel, to break the bonds of Satan. The Sabbath day is a day of liberation. It's the channel for God's power and His healing ministry. Now, she's bound for 18 years. Couldn't she wait till Sunday morning? Couldn't she wait till Monday or Tuesday? Why does Jesus do it on the Sabbath day? To teach us that that's the meaning of the Sabbath. To release people, to heal them, to restore them, to set them free. Yes, question.
It's just an observation. And the point is, the woman didn't come up to him and say, heal me. He said to her, woman, come here and be healed.
Yes. Observation is that Jesus initiated it all. That's correct. And that's the point that I'm making. He initiated it because he was trying to teach that that's the meaning of the Sabbath day. That's right. All right. Now this is acts of healing and necessity. Acts of necessity, of healing, of freeing people from Satan's bonds are most appropriate on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath was made for the purpose of setting people free from all of Satan's bonds. Whatever you have to do to set people free is lawful on the Sabbath day. Another story. Luke 14, 1-3. Now what happened as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath. So looks like he got invited home from the synagogue. Was this going to be a friendly person? No, not exactly. That they watched him closely. And behold, there was a certain man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus answering spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? So now he was anticipating their thoughts. And so we asked the question, hey, look, hey, lawyers, is it legal? Is it right? Is it lawful to heal on a Sabbath day? He asked the question. He asked them the question. By the way, on the next page there, I asked the question, what is dropsy? Just in case does anybody know what dropsy is? Okay, what I found out, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I found out is that it's an abnormal infiltration and excessive accumulation of serous fluid in connective tissue or in a serous cavity. In other words, the man was all swelled up with fluid. This time, Jesus asked them if it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath day. He presses them with the question, which is uppermost in their minds. The act of breaking the Sabbath according to Jewish tradition or not. Again, it's not about whether we should keep the Sabbath. It's only about what? How, yes. Anyway, what does Jesus do? First of all, Luke records that they were silent. And when somebody presses you with a question and you're silent, what does that mean? It means that you don't dare answer because you know that when you do, you're going to be wrong. So you just keep shut. And he took him and he healed him and let him go. Then he answered them, saying, which of you, having a donkey or an ass that has fallen to a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? In other words, it sounds like the same old stuff, doesn't it? As it is. So acts of benevolence and saving a life are lawful. Acts of healing, benevolence, and saving a life are all lawful on the Sabbath day. Make sense? Okay. Let's go to another story. John 5. This is a particularly interesting story. Jesus finds this man laying on his cot. It's really kind of like a little roll-up mat at the pool of Bethesda, where the tradition was that when the waters stirred, if you were the first one in the pool, you'd be healed. Of course, it's all mythology and not really actual fact. But people believed it, and that's what counted. And so they were lying there. And Jesus walked up to this poor man who had been lame now for 38 years. And it was on a Sabbath day. And he tells the man, rise, take up your pallet, and walk. Notice the question. Notice the command. Rise and do what? Take up your pallet. He could have just said rise. But he tells him to pick up his little, bamboo cot, whatever, one of these little roll-up things, and go and walk. Why does he do that? He wants to get the attention of the religious leaders because he's going to prove who he is in his relationship with his Father through him showing the true nature of Sabbath observance. The Sabbath is to restore people, right? Jesus doesn't go around healing everybody on the Sabbath, but he picks out this most desperate case and he heals him, and he puts him on display before the religious leaders. Verses 9 and 10, it says, "And at once the man was healed, and he took up his pallet and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who was cured, 'It is the Sabbath day. It is not lawful for you to carry your what?'" Okay. They're not even interested in why or where he's coming from or that he just got healed or anything else. They don't even care. What they're interested in is that you're breaking the rule. Where did that rule come from? Was that in the Ten Commandments? Is there a rule in the fourth commandment that says you should not carry a pallet? Where did that rule come from? It came from their requirements, human tradition, legalistic thinking. Now that's very important because we're going to see something happen here. All right. Now, look at, on your sheet, we're going to read now where it says verse 8, letter A, John 5:8. Jesus heals the man and tells the man to carry away his cot or bedding. Jesus wants to make this healing a test case and is purposely creating an issue regarding the nature of Sabbath observance, which he will settle by reference to his unique relationship to God the Father. So he deliberately breaks the Sabbath, note the next words, according to the what? Tradition of the Jews, in order to get their attention and to reveal the real truth about Sabbath observance and also the truth about who he really is, that is, the Son of God. So, verses 9 and 10, we've read. This is the very reason why the Jews went after Jesus, because of the Sabbath issue. And now we look at verse 16. And this was why the Jews persecuted Jesus, because he did this on the what? On the Sabbath, yes. Jesus knew this miracle would lead to a confrontation. He was willing to have it, nevertheless, to be able to teach the truth. Now, some come to verses 17 and 18 and read it out of context. When I say read out of context, what does that mean? It means you take a word or a phrase and you run with it, rather than let that word or phrase bear its meaning in the verses before and the verses afterward. Here it is. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working still, and I am working." This was why the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only what? What's the next few words? Broke the Sabbath. Aha! Someone says, "See, Jesus broke the Sabbath." It says it right there. But also called God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Now, did Jesus break the Sabbath? It's a trick question, isn't it? He broke the Sabbath according to the Jewish traditions, but in the way that he did that, he was keeping his Father's commandments, because notice what it says, "My Father is working still and I'm working." He's only doing what the Father told him. His Father is the one who told him to go to the pool of Bethesda and to zero in on this person and to heal him. If God is going to do that and he's just doing what God does, then is he breaking his Father's commandment, or is he obeying it? He's obeying it, yes, absolutely. Okay, now, there's a paragraph there that says, "My Father is working and I'm working." Do you see that one? Let's read that together. Jesus is here saying, it is impossible to have broken the Sabbath, for he only did what God told him to do. God works on all days to keep life in continuance, including the Sabbath. And to heal a man is also a part of God's plan to restore life. In fact, Jesus is saying God himself ordained to heal this man on the Sabbath to show that he was sent by God. How so? That through a miracle, he could teach the legalistic Jews that showing acts of mercy on the Sabbath was a part of the true meaning of worship on the Sabbath day, and that Jesus was his Son. That's the true meaning of that event and that historical event in John chapter 5. Okay, now look at the next paragraph. Now in verse 18, when it says Jesus broke the Sabbath, it means, of course, according to the accusation of the Pharisees and according to the tradition of the Pharisees. That's the context. Who accused him? The Pharisees. What was their standard? Their own traditional laws. Exactly. So that's why they accused them of it. Now, folks, did Jesus break the Sabbath according to the oral law of the Pharisees? Yes. Did he really break it according to the teaching of the Old Testament? No. By doing works of healing and love and mercy, he's showing in full the true extent and real meaning. Like I said before, there was no law in the Sabbath regarding carrying a pallet. So obviously we're talking about the Jewish traditions here. But if you agree that this text teaches that Jesus really broke the Sabbath, which God gave in the Ten Commandments, and I've heard some people argue that way, then you are really taking the side of the Pharisees. Now that is not a very good side to be on. For they, in the same breath, said also that Jesus was not the Son of God. You don't want to be on that side. And their judgment of Jesus' Sabbath observance was not based on God's word, but on man-made rules. Wouldn't you rather be on the side of him who is the Lord of the Sabbath? If so, then it is easy to see that Jesus broke only their man-made rules, all the while going about doing what God the Father told him to do and show honor to the Sabbath day. Now, Jesus defends his action as he meets these people at another occasion, on another day. And we find this in John chapter 7. This is our next little story. John 7, 23 to 24. And here, what's happening is that Jesus says, you guys are out to kill me. And they say, we're not trying to kill you. You're filled with a demon. Jesus says, I'm not filled with a demon. And now this discussion takes place. He says, look, if on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with what? Right judgment. Now God tells us, Jesus tells us, don't judge other people. But he's here saying to judge theological truth. Judge by right thinking, right appearances. Judge correctly truth. And what he's saying here is that, look, if you, on the 8th day, and by the way, that's the law, right? On the 8th day, children were to be circumcised. And that was like supposedly making the whole child, fully complete in the covenant. If you make him whole by circumcising him on the 8th day, and if that 8th day happens to come on the Sabbath, you still have to get out the knife, and you still have to get out the stitch, and whatever you have to do, and you do it, how can you blame me when I take a whole man and restore him, a son of Abraham, to God? It doesn't make sense. So I'm keeping the law, and I'm doing the right thing, and your laws are not right. Does that make sense? Okay. So we go to a little summary here. Summary of Jesus' Sabbath principles. Whatever you have to do to attend worship services on the Sabbath day, whatever you have to do to show acts of goodness, kindness, benevolence, and of saving life, whatever you have to do to attend to real necessities, whatever has to be done to proclaim the gospel. Does that make sense to you guys? Any thoughts, input? Question back here.
If I just have the Pharisees,
Mm-hmm.
the rules of Jesus to the Father,
Yes?
what is the name of the book himself?
Okay, the question is, where can we find these man-made rules that the Jews held themselves to? That would be the Mishnah. It was written around 200 AD, and there are sections in there where you can read about all the rules, the categories and the multitudes of rules that they had, and the ifs and the nans and all the legalistic formulas that they had for various things. You couldn't walk past a certain distance. If you were to carry something out of your house, you had to bring it to the threshold, and then you had to go outside the house and then pick up the thing and then go that way. You couldn't actually carry something out of the threshold. Or you could bring it there and someone else could come and get it. If an egg got boiled by accident because it was in the hot sand, you couldn't eat it because that would be considered work. The list goes on and on and on, and I don't want to bore anybody about this, but that's basically it, okay? All right, very good. Now, let's kind of wind all this information together. It says here, now in putting all these principles into practice, we want to operate on the idea that the Sabbath is an opportunity to be with God, to obtain a special blessing. Like a modern-day rabbi calls it a sanctuary in time. Okay? Indeed, this is true. It is like a date with God, a date with Jesus. And that's why I have this little picture on the screen. Jesus, the Sabbath, and me, applying the seal of God. You see, this is a special time for you to draw close to Him. He's giving it to you. It's His day, and He's inviting you to join Him in it. It's a date with God. When's the last time you remember going on a date? You going to go on a date pretty soon? Because I heard you about going on a vacation, anniversary, right? Okay, I think that qualifies as a date. Okay, how would you like to take your business with you and answer the phone? How would you like to do, lots of housework, painting, lawn work? How would you like to have to do shopping at Walmart and Home Depot? Would you like to do all that stuff? Or would that sort of like put an end to the date? You get the idea? You see, this long list that I put down here, taking out the trash, doing house cleaning, mowing the lawn, doing grocery shopping, going to work, watching television, painting the house, etc., etc., all these things would really upset the date, wouldn't it? So that's why the Lord Jesus tells us to put aside our regular secular work. Now, there are some people who have to work in various jobs and circumstances, according to the principles that we just talked about, right? The sick, the elderly, and the infirm need to be taken care of, correct? Emergency services need to be secured, security issues and so forth. These are all things that have to go on. But people should, get every other Sabbath off so they can enter into the joys of it. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with these things. It's a matter of them keeping us away from communion with Christ. Now, I'm going to share with you here a little bit of how you might want to consider welcoming the Sabbath. By the way, when does Sabbath come? Friday evening? At when? At sundown, yes. You see where I have A, B, and so forth here? On Friday, day of preparation, and try to get done ahead of things, try to get done ahead of time the things that are generally of need and require attention. Let's go to B. Then on Friday evening, when the sun is setting, I like to gather my family around, sing songs, read some devotional thoughts, talk about it, pray together, light a candle, create your own traditions, whatever you like to do. This is a tremendous time to be together with your family. Then to have a special meal together. Make it a special time, something out of the ordinary, something simple. Make a special treat. Make it fun. Then I like to spend some time with the family, maybe watch a Bible video or talk to them about the Lord, have spiritual discussions, various spiritual activities. Before too long, it's time to go to bed. On Sabbath morning, what do? You go to Sabbath school, Bible study, right? And church, divine worship. Sabbath afternoon, I'm free to do a variety of things, namely what? Acts of benevolence, kindness, saving life, preaching the gospel, word and deed, giving Bible study, studying the word myself, studying God's book of nature, taking a rest. And you can go on and on. Does that make sense? In other words, this is God's gift to you. And end the Sabbath at sunset with some kind of recognition of a blessing from God. Now, we're all at different levels of appropriating these principles into our life. And we should not judge one another about them. In fact, we're told in the Bible that we shouldn't judge one another as to how we, observe our Sabbath days. Some more experienced than others will do some things different than those who are just learning and growing. And that's okay. Everyone needs to learn their own way on this matter. But apply the principles. It's not a matter of, everybody just does whatever they want. It's a matter of apply the principles. And there are some things that definitely should not be done. The Scripture is clear that regular secular work to earn your living should stop. Someone says, well, God doesn't expect me to lose my job, does He? If necessary, yes. but then He'll help you find another one. That's where faith in God comes in. That's where faith... See, our God is a creator God. Jesus Christ is the creator, and He will create for you a new future. But it doesn't have to come to that necessarily. And then again, we talked about the type of work that needs to be going on regarding people who have to take care of emergency situations, sick situations, and so forth. There are certain jobs like that. But they should arrange their schedule in such a way that they can also have a Sabbath off at least every other week. Then there are some things that definitely should be done. And these are: attend church, practice spiritual gifts, share the gospel, do acts of kindness, save life, acts of necessity, and so forth. And I grant you there's a lot of things in what we could call a gray zone. And these we have to learn about the best we can and bring before God. And if you're always honest to God, if you're always bringing yourself to God and saying, Lord, I'm just doing what I think is the right thing, and if it's different and if it's wrong, please teach me. Show me from Scripture. And if you're always in the Word studying it, God will show you. And you will be drawing close to the Lord. By the way, we have all eternity to learn about the Sabbath, right? Because it says that when this earth is remade from one Sabbath to another, the redeemed will observe the Sabbath day. Isaiah, yes, Isaiah 66. So, let's each one of us go forth with a determined mind to learn what is pleasing to the Lord in this matter. And let's always remember that the Sabbath was made for man, made for every one of us.